If you've been following along with our study of James, you know that this letter is incredibly practical. It doesn't let us hide behind religious vocabulary or abstract theories. James is constantly dragging our faith out into the light of our daily lives and asking, does it actually work? In the first half of this chapter, we looked at the tongue. We saw how a tiny 3-ounce muscle inside our mouths has the power to direct our entire lives, or to set our relationships on fire with the very flames of hell. But now, James shifts his focus. He moves from the words of our mouths to the wisdom of our minds. But here's the twist. When James talks about wisdom, he's not talking about your IQ. He's not talking about how many books you've read, how many degrees you have, or how well you can argue a theological point. James is going to show us that there are two entirely different kinds of wisdom operating in this world. And they don't just differ in what they know, they differ in where they come from. This is the central thread of this entire passage. James is not contrasting the smart person with the foolish person, or the educated with the uneducated. He is contrasting two different sources. One wisdom comes from above, it is a gift from God. The other wisdom does not. It comes from below. It is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. And James is going to place these two wisdoms side by side, like two trees, and show us that you can identify which one is running your life by looking at the fruit you are producing. So if we start in verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by his good conduct that his deeds are done in gentleness of wisdom. Notice James's style here. This is classic for him. He begins with a question that invites self-examination before exposing any false confidence. Who is wise and understanding among you? In the ancient world, just like today, almost everyone would have raised their hand to that question. If you ask a room full of people who here is wise, who here has a good understanding of how life works, very few people are going to say, well, actually, I'm pretty foolish. We all think we have things figured out. We all think our opinions are the right ones. But James doesn't let us claim wisdom. He immediately drops the standard. Let him show by his good conduct that his deeds are done in gentleness of wisdom. So we should stop for a second and think about what James is doing here. He is linking wisdom directly to conduct. Wisdom is not simply knowing things. It is not an intellectual database. It is not the ability to win an argument or explain a complicated doctrine. In the biblical worldview, wisdom is always a lifestyle. And this should take us back to what we saw in James chapter 1, where he told us, but be doers of the word, and not only hearers, deluding your own selves. And it connects directly to James chapter 2, where he argued that true faith is always demonstrated by works. Now, in chapter 3, he applies the exact same principle to wisdom. You cannot say you have wisdom if your life does not show it. Wisdom is demonstrated, not merely possessed. But notice the specific wording that James uses to describe how this wisdom is shown. He says, in gentleness of wisdom. When we hear the word meekness, we often think of weakness. We think of a doormat. We think of someone who is timid, quiet, and easily pushed around. But that is not what the Bible means by meekness. Meekness is a calm temper of mind, not easily provoked. It was used to describe a wild stallion that had been tamed and brought under control. The horse still has all its raw power, all its muscles, its speed. It could easily throw a rider or stampede, but its strength has been submitted to the will of the rider. Meekness is not weakness. Meekness is power under control. It is the calm confidence that doesn't need to yell to be heard. It is the security that doesn't need to assert itself, push others down, or win every argument to feel safe. In James 1:19, he says, so then, my beloved brothers, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. True biblical wisdom does not walk into a room with its chest puffed out, demanding respect. True wisdom walks in with a quiet, gentle confidence, ready to serve, ready to listen, and slow to speak. If your wisdom makes you sharp, arrogant, and argumentative, James says you are using the wrong definition of the word. Now, in verse 14, James does what he does best. He lets people have their sense of self-righteousness, and then he shatters it. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and don't lie against the truth. James is addressing the people who claim to be wise, who claim to be leaders or teachers, but whose inner lives are driven by something toxic. And he points to two specific heart attitudes: bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. Let's take a second and look at those two things. Bitter jealousy is not just a strong desire. The word bitter tells you something about its character. It is sharp, cutting, toxic. It is the feeling of resentment when someone else succeeds. It is the quiet anger that rises in your chest when someone else gets the credit, the promotion, or the praise. The second term is selfish ambition. This is the attitude of a person who is constantly calculating. How does this benefit me? How can I use this situation, this relationship, or even this church to advance my own platform, my own reputation, or my own career? It is the spirit of self-promotion. And James says that if these two things, bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, are living in your heart, then you have no right to claim that you are wise. Don't boast and don't lie against the truth. If you claim to be spiritually mature, but your heart is filled with toxic envy and a drive to promote yourself, your claim is a lie. You are boasting about a wisdom you do not possess. You are lying against the very truth of the gospel. This is a massive reality check for anyone in ministry, anyone in leadership, or anyone who simply wants to be respected for their spiritual insights. You can have the most brilliant theological mind in the world. You can speak with incredible eloquence. You can build a massive platform. But if your driving motivation is self promotion, and if your heart is bitter when others succeed, James says your wisdom is a counterfeit. It is a lie. If this false wisdom doesn't come from God, then where does it come from? James tells us in verse 15, and he uses three incredibly heavy words to describe its nature and its source. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. Notice the distinction James is making here. He doesn't say this person is stupid or uneducated. He calls it wisdom. This is highly practical. The world has its own kind of wisdom. There is a way of navigating life, business, relationships, and even ministry that works by the world's standards. It is a wisdom that says, look out for number one, demand your rights, push your way to the front, use people to get where you need to go. By the world's standards, that is smart. That is how you get ahead. That is wisdom. But James says this wisdom is not that which comes down from above. It has a completely different source, and he describes it with three words that move in a downward spiral: earthly, sensual, and demonic. First, it is earthly. This wisdom is completely bound to this present world. It has no eternal horizon. It only looks at what can be seen, measured, and consumed right now. It calculates success solely in terms of money, power, comfort, and immediate results. Second, it is sensual, or as some translations put it, unspiritual. This refers to a life run entirely by natural human instincts, emotions, appetites, and self-preservation. It is the wisdom that says, if it feels right, do it. If you are angry, vent. If you want it, take it. It is completely disconnected from the Holy Spirit's influence. Third, and most terrifyingly, James says it is demonic. James is not saying that everyone who acts out of selfish ambition is possessed by a demon, but he is saying that the entire system of self-promotion and bitter jealousy is inspired by and aligned with the kingdom of darkness. It is the very spirit of Satan himself, who said in his heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. Every time we use manipulation, gossip, pride, or self-promotion to get our way, we are not just being human. We are borrowing methods from the enemy. We are operating in a wisdom that has its ultimate origin in the kingdom of darkness. James wants us to see the gravity of this. There is no such thing as harmless self-promotion. There is no such thing as just a little bitter envy. It is a wisdom that is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. To prove his point, James shows us what happens when this false wisdom is allowed to run a life, a family, or a church. For where jealousy and selfish ambition are, There is confusion and every evil deed. James is giving us a spiritual law of harvest. If you plant the seeds of jealousy and selfish ambition, you are guaranteed to reap two specific fruits: confusion and every evil deed. Confusion here means instability, disorder, chaos, and rebellion. It is the exact opposite of peace and order. When a church is divided, a family is constantly fighting, when a business is filled with backstabbing and political maneuvering, James says you don't need to look very far to find the cause. You don't need to analyze the complex personalities involved. You just need to look for selfish ambition. Where people are driven by a desire to promote themselves, chaos is the natural, inevitable result. And along with chaos comes every evil deed. Once self-promotion becomes the driving force of a community or a life, the door is thrown wide open to every kind of compromise. People will lie to protect their position. They will slander to destroy their rivals. They will compromise their integrity to get ahead. The entire environment becomes toxic. This is the warning of false wisdom. It promises success, but it delivers chaos. It promises promotion, but it delivers corruption. Thankfully, James does not leave us in the dark. He shifts from the darkness of false wisdom to the beautiful, breathtaking light of true wisdom. He says, "But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceful, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy." This is one of the most beautiful descriptions of Christian character in the entire New Testament. It is the equivalent of Paul's fruit of the Spirit in Galatians. And notice how James structures this. He says true wisdom is first pure, then. There is a deliberate priority here. Purity is the foundation. True wisdom does not have a hidden agenda. It is not trying to manipulate you. It is transparent. It is clean. It is free from corrupt motives. And because it is pure, it can then produce these other beautiful qualities. It is peaceful. True wisdom is a peacemaker, not a peace breaker. It doesn't walk into a room looking for a fight. It seeks reconciliation. It is gentle. This refers to a person who is reasonable, fair, and willing to yield their rights. It is the opposite of a legalist who demands the letter of the law. It is a person who knows when to show grace, when to forgive, and when to overlook an offense. It is reasonable, easy to approach, teachable, and willing to listen. True wisdom is not defensive. It doesn't react with anger when corrected. It is willing to say, "I was wrong. Thank you for showing me that." It is full of mercy and good fruits. True wisdom is not just a theory. It is active. It sees a brother in need and moves towards them with compassion. It produces tangible, visible fruit of righteousness. It is without partiality. It doesn't play favorites. It treats the rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak with the exact same dignity. This is a direct echo of what James taught us in chapter 2 regarding the sin of partiality. It is without hypocrisy. What you see is what you get. It doesn't wear a religious mask to cover up a bitter heart. And so let's take a second and really look at that. This is not a list of rules to follow. This is a picture of a person. This is what a life looks like when it is surrendered to the wisdom that comes from above. It is clean, it is peaceful, approachable, kind, it is fair, and it is honest. And let's notice what is completely absent from this portrait. There is no mention of cleverness, no mention of winning debates, no mention of personal success or influence. True wisdom is characterized entirely by character, conduct, and love. And so now James closes this chapter with a beautiful poetic summary of his argument. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. This is a farming metaphor. James is telling us that righteousness is not something you can force or manufacture overnight. Righteousness is a harvest. And if you want a harvest of righteousness, you have to understand two things: how to sow and where to sow. First, the seed must be sown in peace. You cannot produce a harvest of righteousness through anger, manipulation, division, or self promotion. This ties back to what James told us in chapter 1. For the anger of man doesn't produce the righteousness of God. If you try to force people to do what is right through sharp, critical, or angry words, you are sowing in the wrong soil. You are using earthly wisdom, and that will only produce chaos. Second, this seed is sown by those who make peace. This is a beautiful connection to Jesus' teaching in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Peacemakers are not passive people who simply avoid conflict at all costs. Peacemakers are active. They are people who enter into broken, chaotic situations and actively work to sow seeds of reconciliation, gentleness, and truth. And over time, those quiet, gentle seeds of peace grow into a beautiful, abundant harvest of righteousness. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, which harvest do we want in our lives? Which harvest do we want in our homes, our marriages, our friendships, and our churches? If we want the harvest of righteousness, we must stop sowing the seeds of self-promotion. So we come to the end of James chapter 3, and James leaves us with a very clear, very sober choice. There are two kinds of wisdom operating in your life today. There is a wisdom that comes from below. It is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. It tells you that the only way to survive, the only way to succeed, and the only way to protect yourself is to push, to strive, to envy, and to promote yourself. And there is a wisdom that comes from above. It is pure, peaceful, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy, and sincere. It tells you that you can rest because your life is in the hands of a loving Father. It tells you that you don't need to promote yourself because God is the one who lifts up the humble. Which wisdom are we living by? If we look honestly at our lives right now, our relationships, our conversations, our motives, what kind of fruit are we seeing? Are we seeing confusion, chaos, and conflict? Or are we seeing peace, gentleness, mercy, and sincerity? And we need to be honest here. None of us can produce the wisdom from above by our own strength. We cannot manufacture purity or gentleness out of a heart that is naturally prone to self preservation. We need help. And this is why James's words in chapter 1 are so incredibly comforting. He didn't tell us to go try harder to be wise. He told us to ask. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. If you see bitter envy in your heart today, if you see the drive for self promotion, don't try to cover it up. Don't lie against the truth. Bring it to the Father. Confess it. Lay it at the feet of Jesus and ask Him to pour His wisdom from above into your soul. Ask Him to purify your motives, to quiet your restless striving, and to make you a peacemaker who sows in peace.